Yeah, this is a book called Voices Within. It was a colleague of mine, a musician, Bombay Jershi, and I co-authored this book. It's more like a pictorial book. The idea came up sometime early, maybe 2000, around that time, when we felt that, when we look for books that are pictorial about this country, and we see books on jewelry, on saris, on temples, on various aspects of our living, but very little that celebrates art, especially performing art. So that's when it got us thinking and saying, why don't we make a celebration of great musicians who have lived in this country? And if you look at that narrative, you'll find that the country is more or less only stuck with certain names from the northern part of this country as being a musical discourse for this country. Well, this country is a very, very diverse musical country with great musicians being from all over all parts of the country. So then we said, okay, why don't we do something on Carnatic music, the music that both of us sing. This is Bombay Jershi, the singer, and myself. And we said, okay, suppose we can make a pictorial description of their life. And not just pictorial, but if we can also talk about their lives and look at them as musicians, but as individuals who grew in certain socio-political conditions and who grew artistically, emotionally, professionally through a period of time. And why don't we make this a celebration of them? So it was an amazing experience for us to do, because nothing like this had ever been done before. There had been no pictorial book on South Indian Carnatic music until Voices Within. So for us it was the first time. So whether it was about going to libraries, finding the rarest of letters, finding photographs that really captured the moments of their lives, and then building a narrative that we co-authored with another friend called Maithili Chandrasekhar. Three of us co-authored the written narrative, and look at how we can talk about their lives so that any person who has any inkling towards human creativity and sharing will find it fascinating and interesting. So we built this book we wrote this for quite some time actually. It took us a long time and luckily because we're musicians, we got access to a lot of rare letters, we got access to a lot of rare photographs, and so the book is completely black and white. It's black and white is, like I was saying this morning, Dayanita was talking in the session, black and white is a misnomer because most of black and white is grey. So there's very little white and black in black and white. So I think that added a lot of color to the whole book. And we chose 7 musicians. That was difficult because there are how many musicians over the last century? Hundreds, and they all deserve to be there. But why did we choose 7? We felt we are looking at musicians who not only were just great musicians, but whose contribution, his impact has stayed beyond their lives to a large extent. So though we could have chosen 15, 20, we chose 7, and 7 seemed a interesting number because 7 is the 7 notes too. There are 7 notes. So in many ways we felt maybe 7 is a good number. So we started with Ariyakudi Ramanuja Iyengar, who is considered the modern maker of the concert. The concert that you hear today is the Carnatic concert, or what we call the Kacheri, is pretty much structured or popularized in that structure by this one man called Ariyakudi. So he in a way created a modern narrative for Carnatic music. So we started with him, then went to many other musicians. T.N. Rajaratnam Pillai, the Nagasura Vidwan. He literally brought back the Nagasura into vogue. He gave the Nagasura musicians status and symbol because there's a caste battle being fought there. He was included. Flute Mali, the maverick, genius, eccentric man who really recreated the flute. The flute was considered a poor imitation of the voice. Then the flute became itself because of him. Shamaguru Srinivas Iyer, another Doan who lived till in his 90s in the field. Palghat Maniyar, who again recreated the mridangam. M.S. Subbalakshmi. There can't be a book about Carnatic music that does not have her. The kind of impact she has had as a person, as a symbol, as a musician is something unparalleled. We had her in the book. We had who else? G.N. Balasubramaniam, the first really graduate musician that Carnatic music had. So the English-speaking musician, so to speak, he was there in the book. So there are 7 musicians on the whole in the book. And not only that, we also had little pages that talked about the socio-political scene at the time. Something that described the whole Devidasis. something that described the whole idea of concerts beyond the proscenium stage. For example, wedding concerts are a very interesting phenomena you see in the South, with Carnatic music being performed. So how did that come up? What is happening in that? Cinema, the role of cinema, and many Carnatic musicians acted in films. So that whole idea of that whole convergence of cinema, Carnatic music, and musicians who acted, and all these things were also brought in. We also brought in conflicts that were there. For example, the whole language issue that became very, very important in the 20s, 30s and 40s, when Tamil was being propagated as the language for Carnatic music vis-a-vis Sanskrit or Telugu, and the whole battle that took place between different sections of society, and that was interwoven into the political narrative of that time, which was part of the self-respect movement that Periyar had started in Tamil Nadu. Those kind of aspects also come into the book. So in a way, this book is a summary of shall we say 20th century Carnatic music through the eyes of 7 musicians and various other things. Yeah, they don't happen within the chapters, they are in between the chapters. Like I said, we have tried to make most of the commentary pictorial, because we feel that that book was intended that way. So all these aspects come in as between the chapters on the musician. So you have 7 chapters, and between every chapter you have one narrative. One on the whole idea of press, on writing about art, was also brought into this narrative. So it's in between chapters that we brought in, not into the chapters. See, we have a lot of information about, we have scattered information, not a lot, I correct myself. It looked like before that music, there were less compositions in a concert. It was more about alapanas, more about freestyle singing, limited compositions. So there was, I think, more a focus on art improvisational music rather than compositional music. With Ariyakudi, he tried bringing more compositions into the concert. I mean, when I say he did it, it's probably a movement that started even before him, but he kind of, shall we say, crystallized it. And there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is that a lot of the modern narrative of Carnatic music has been influenced by Harikatha. Because at one time, a lot of Harikatha exponents were also Carnatic musicians. They were doubling the two. So I think a lot of influence of Harikatha, where compositions of Tyagaraja were used as part of storytelling narratives, they spilled over into the concert stage. I also think that Tamil drama, the Tamil drama scene of the early 20th century, late 19th century may have also played a role in terms of how the voice was used, the idea of the stage, idea of entertainment, the idea of keeping the audience attention, holding the audience attention. All these aspects also, I think, influence the whole narrative being built. No. Grammar has been something we've been part of this discourse for hundreds of years. We have treatises always being written that has discussed grammar and musicians. In fact, I'll say Carnatic music is a rare case where usually grammar is written after the music. So grammar is a commentary or the theorization is based on the practice. But actually in Carnatic music around the 16th, 17th century, things started getting inverted. Theorization started becoming the source for practical music performance. So, but in the 20th century, something interesting did happen, that a re-theorization of music happened. Because this whole thing was also part of the nationalistic fervor of finding one's own identity. So the whole idea that music went onto the proscenium stage itself is a way to prove that our music is no less than Western classical music. So you had people sitting on chairs, you had formalization of the music. Also theorization, which was greatly influenced by the British, because the British were already trying to understand the music. William Jones, many people had written about it. So the whole theory movement that started, early 20th century theory movement, was a very new kind of theory movement in many ways, that it tried to ape a lot of the European theory movement, but it also started creating, I think, newer narratives to understandings. Textbooks were written on theorization. Textbooks on Carnatic music theory were written. All this was part of a new age process of creating theory, and in the process of creating theory, establishing the music as being very authentic, very old. So using modern technique of theory to establish an antiquity was also done. So all this was part of 20th century narrative. Ariyakudi is from early 20th century. I think his birth maybe late 1900s, I mean 1800s, I don't know his birth date. but he ruled the world of Carnatic music over the 30s and the 40s, and till the 50s he was considered a father figure for many stars who came later. He was like the father figure, and the word they used, the margadarshi, the person who showed the path, and everybody followed the path. Well, the book starts with Ariyakudi, but in terms of, because like you said, it's a pictorial book, so it had to be on the 20th century. But also we had focused on 20th century because 20th century is when we really understand the music as we have it today. The oldest person in the book is Ariyakudi, without any doubt, because he was the modern narrative pretty much goes to him, and everybody is followed. That's the narrative that I have now questioned greatly in my second book, A Southern Music, where I have actually questioned that narrative as not being the universal narrative, that we have a problem in accepting as a universal narrative. Whereas in that book, I have just stated that that is the narrative that he gave and that everybody followed it. I think that most of them, yes, I think if you ask me, Mali, the flautist, was somebody who came from a different planet, if I can say that. Musically, the way he presented his art form, it was very, very supposed to be very moody, but I think his narrative was very, very different from anything everybody else followed. Everybody else more or less followed the Ariyakudi template. But even within that, we have to acknowledge that it was G. N. Balasubramaniam or Shemangadu Srinivas Iyer. They created their own self within that. But it was still within the world that was accepted and formulated by Ariyakudi. See, Ariyakuri's formula of presenting a concert became successful. Let's be very clear. It was successful. It was a hit. And it was naturally something everybody else followed. And I see that very logically. And to a large extent, we must also recognize, though I can now critique looking back, that in the book also, I like to call all these people entrepreneurs. And I'm using that in a very positive sense, because it was a new age when music was coming to a official stage where patrons paid money. So they were negotiating all these changes. There was no king or zamindars anymore. They were paid public. So they were also, I think, trying to negotiate the new channels and the new environment. And they found their own way of negotiating it and making it valid. And Ariyakudi felt this is the best way to hold that audience or build the audience or build the community. And once it succeeded, everybody felt that's the way to go. Yes, the format means you've summarized it differently, but the format is basically even more micromanaged in terms of how you order the pieces, which kind of piece should come after which kind of piece, what is the general tempo of a concert, when is a concert, what gives the concert a good start, all these ideas. So they are far more specific. It goes into even nitty-gritty on so how do you frame a good concert, for example. We'll go with all these nitty-gritties on what comes after what. Why should this come after this? So if I sang a slow piece, I then sing a fast piece. Why? The argument is contrast, but I can counter-argue that too. So all these things went into the Ariyakudi mold. And some flexibility was found individually, but overall, it stayed. What kind of ragas work earlier in the concert? What kind of ragas work later in a concert? See, all these things go into the idea of the Ariyakudi plan. I mean, there are deviations and there are changes, but if you look at an overall survey, you will find that is the plan that everybody, more or less, exceptions like Mali, but more or less everybody has followed it because it's a working plan. See, Rajaratnam Pillai was one of the greatest instrumentalists this country has had. He literally, like Mali did, what Mali did to the flute, Rajaratnam Pillai did to the Nagaswara, which is why we have both of them in the book. Nagaswara was pretty much considered, was an instrument that was very respected, but there was nobody, I think, when Rajaratnam Pillai started playing, he took the artistry to a different frame. He's supposed to have also changed the way the holes were managed physically in the instrument, making it far more versatile. He also, one of the earlier musicians to use the longer Nagaswara. If you see Nagaswara, it's long. At one time it was called the Timiri Nagaswara, which is only this size. So he again, supposed to be one of the pioneers of using the longer Nagaswara. He also pioneered the idea that the Nagaswara artist can sit down and play. That's a social thing also. I mean, yes, the Nagaswara Vidwans were in the temple walking around, but he pioneered the idea of having seated concerts with accompanists. Mridangam was accompanying Nagaswara, which is not done then, only Taval did. He looked at that possibility also. He brought a lot of dignity to Nagaswara artists. he influenced vocalists tremendously. That is another thing. A lot of vocalists were enamored and influenced by his music. So he was a big game changer in many ways in terms of how raga, especially alapana and raga music, was conceived of. I think Rajaratnam Pillai is a very special artist. Absolutely, that's the truth. That the Nagaswara Vidwans before Rajaratnam Pillai, they were respected for artistry. But the Nagaswara Vidwans came from a different caste group, and there was that separation and that problem that existed. And I think person who challenged it head on was Rajaratnam Pillai. In the way he lived his life and where he played his music, he challenged that kind of a perception head on, and he took it head on in many ways, definitely. Well, I've spoken about that in my book, Southern Music, great detail. Caste is a problem, and it has been, there are multiple socio-political reasons on why it happened, no point, I won't go into that now, but this is an issue that needs serious addressing, that this music is more or less practiced, supported, celebrated and listened to by predominantly one community, and if you don't recognize that as a problem, then I think that is a problem.